To set the scene a little bit for this story, I have to go back a few years. I was on a canoe expedition with a group of 6 friends, and we were in northern Manitoba on the Hayes River, which is a great river if you know it, and beautiful. And when we go on a canoe trip with my group of friends, we go pretty epic. And so we go 2 weeks. We usually go about 1,000 kilometers. I know it sounds unbelievable, but we've got some great paddlers, and so this one trip was on the Hayes River, and 2-week trip. We were about a week into the trip, and we were coming through this section of the Hayes River where there's a lot of rapids and waterfalls and portages and all the stuff you'd expect from a really epic, extreme canoe trip. And at this 1-week point, we come to one rapids, and there's usually 2 choices when you come to rapids, especially on a river that you've never been before. You automatically scout it. Actually, you take a look and see, can we go through this without killing ourselves, or do we have to take a portage? So we went to this one rapids. We took a look at it. We realized it was too big. We're going to have to make a portage. So we carried all our gear through this long, windy portage, got to the other side, and then after taking that trip once, we decided instead of taking the portage, there's a third option that we can do. We can line the canoe. So basically just dragging the canoe along the shore. We drag the canoe along the shore, and we make a mistake, and we end up letting the canoe go a little bit, and the canoe actually floats away from us. And we start running down the side of the river as best as we can. And we end up seeing, at the end of the portage, we end up seeing the canoe floating towards this waterfalls, which is about 1 kilometer away. And we're all just kind of looking at each other like, we're 1 week into a trip. We're probably about 400 kilometers from the nearest town, and we're looking at our canoe floating towards the waterfall. But for some reason, the ropes that we had tied to the canoe, they're floating ropes. One of them had sunk and got caught on a rock. And so the canoe was actually floating right in the middle of the river. And so 500 meters from us and 500 meters from the waterfall. So we look at each other and we're like figuring out a plan to get out of here. We don't have a satellite phone, but we did have some of our gear, right? We thought we were going to portage, so we had clothes and food, so we weren't worried, but we wanted to get out of there. So we decide, actually my dad was on the trip too, he decides, kind of the leader of the trip, he says, the only way we're going to get out of here is we swim to the canoe. So he looks right at me, and we're all a very tense moment, and he says, I don't want you to go. He looks at me, he says he's going to go, but he doesn't want me to go, in case, and like when he said that, we all kind of like gulped, like there's a chance that he could die here. And so he picks a friend, they end up swimming towards the canoe, and we're tensely watching them swim towards the canoe. And they end up swimming past the canoe, and we can't see them for a moment, and I'm just thinking, there's a waterfalls over there, what are these guys doing? Eventually they do actually hit some shore on the other side of the canoe, and they climb up and they bring the canoe back. So this is where the pot and the spoon comes in. So I'm actually the cook of these trips, and most of the stuff we cook is you have to heat up water, like porridge or rice, and we take a lot of dry goods with us, or coffee. You gotta boil water to make coffee in the morning. So while my dad and them are swimming towards the canoe, I decide to make a big meal for them when they get back, because they're going to be cold. Make a big fire. So I start chopping up wood, and I make a fire, and I said, okay, time to cook. So I look around and I realize that our pots were in the canoe. And at that moment, like I saw my dad was back in the canoe. He wasn't dying. I was calmed down a little bit, but the second worriedness hit me. So how am I going to cook without my pots and pans are sunk somewhere on the river? So this whole process came into my mind. Okay, first I'm going to have to dig a hole. I'm going to fill the hole with water. I'm going to have to make a big fire, heat up the rocks, put the rocks into the hole, boil the water, put the rice into it was just a mess. And I thought, I'm going to look through this stuff once more. I looked through my bag of stuff, and there's nothing in there. looked through the other guy's stuff. I said, do we have anything like I need to cook here? So I looked through the stuff, nothing. I looked through my dad's bag, and at the bottom of the bag was this little basin. It was just a little basin, just this big really, just enough to, however much volume this is, but it was this big. And I laughed to myself because before we started the trip, my mom and dad had an argument about what to take on the trip. And my mom says, you should take this wash basin. And my dad says, fuck that. Like, we're gonna be in the north, we'll just jump in the river if we wanna wash, we don't need the wash basin. My mom got mad. She snuck that into the bottom of his bag. And luckily, I was just thanking her for doing that because I now had a little pot. It was a ceramic pot to cook in. So I get the fire going, I start cooking. It boils water, it holds a few cups of water. I boil the water, make coffee, and I start making a little meal of like rice and beans or something like that. So I'm cooking that. And I happened to actually find a wooden spoon, about this big, in my bag. I don't know, I just had a wooden spoon for some reason. I think my mom stuck it in there too, just to prove another point. And so I was cooking, and my dad comes back, and we kind of settled down, and we were all kind of laughing and making jokes about this very tense situation we survived, and that my dad survived. And so I said, okay, well, I guess it's time to eat. And I felt good about the pot. We're going to survive, and going to have some meals and not have to make a hole every time and boil rocks and this crazy process. So I said, well, now we got to eat. But we don't have any spoons, like all that was lost. So we're going to have to make spoons. So we all then proceed to go into the woods. And I grab an axe, and I went into the woods, and I start chopping down this tree. And I gradually started slowing down. I'm thinking, well, I already have that wooden spoon. Like, there's no point in chopping down this tree and making another spoon. I'll just use the wooden spoon. So we go back to the meal, and we sit around. We put this bowl on a rock, and we're all 6 of us are standing around. And then we proceed one at a time to take out our spoons. And everyone had these beautifully crafted spoons. And they take a mouthful, one at a time. And it gets to my turn. And I pull out the spoon. They hadn't seen it. They look at the spoon as it goes in. I didn't notice them at first, but I saw their heads all shift towards as the spoon goes into the soup I'd made. And I pull it out, and I pull it back to my mouth, and I'm going to take this huge mouthful of this stew that I made. And I paused for a second. I looked around, and they're all looking at me, looking at the spoon, looking at how much food I had on there, and then they looked at their spoons. And then the next day, everyone had their own custom spoons. The second custom spoon, they just kind of threw away their first spoons, and everyone had, basically it was a bowl. We went through the whole basin, one meal, basically took 1 spoon each. Anyways, spoon in the pot, thank you.